Welcome. If this is your first time joining, this video is part of a 12-month healing series. Each month focuses on a different layer of mind, body, spirit alignment. You're welcome to walk the whole year with us or simply take what you need today. The fact that you're here right now tells me that you're ready to make an important shift in your life. This week, we're going to be talking about what agency really is and what it isn't. If month one was about awareness, seeing the illusion, noticing where success became pressure, then month two is all about what comes next. Because awareness changes the conversation inside of you. Once you start seeing the places you've been living from obligation, identity, or inherited definitions, a new question emerges. It's not always spoken out loud, but it's there. If I see this now, am I actually allowed to choose differently? That question is the beginning of agency. And before we do anything practical this month, we need to be clear about what agency actually is, because most people have been taught an unhelpful definition. Most people think agency means being strong, being independent, being decisive, having confidence, and having clarity. They imagine agency as a personality trait or a mindset. I'm the kind of person who knows what they want. But that's not agency, that's presentation. Agency is something far simpler, but also deeper. Agency is the felt sense that you have choice, not theoretical choice, not philosophical choice, the kind of choice your body can actually feel. And many people look powerful on the outside while feeling trapped on the inside, not because they lack options, but because their nervous systems don't register those options as safe. So month two is not about forcing big life changes. It's about restoring the inner experience of choice. Because without that, awareness can become a burden. You can see what's misaligned, but you don't feel able to respond. And that can feel worse than not seeing it at all. So today I want to reframe agency, not as bold action, but as a psychological and physiological state. A state that can be strengthened and a state that can return. And a state that for many people has been quietly diminished by years of coping, succeeding, and adapting. Now, let's start with the science that supports this. In psychology, one of the most consistent findings across decades is that humans don't do well when they feel powerless, not just emotionally, but physiologically. Researchers have long studied the impact of perceived control on stress. The basic idea is this. When people experience stressors as controllable, their bodies respond differently than when stressors feel uncontrollable. Control changes stress. Choice changes stress. Even the perception that you have options can reduce the intensity of a stress response. And when people feel they have no agency, when they feel trapped, stress becomes heavier. It becomes more depleting. This is one reason why two people can have the same exact workload, the same role, the same responsibilities, and one feels grounded while the other is unraveling, because the internal experience is different. One feels I'm choosing this, the other feels I'm trapped in this, and that difference really matters. Another framework that maps to this is locus of control, a classic concept introduced by psychologist Julian Rotter. It describes whether someone experiences life as being primarily shaped by their own actions, an internal locus, or by forces outside of them, an external locus. Now, this isn't about blaming people for difficult circumstances. It's about noticing how internal language and perception influence nervous system state. When you consistently experience life as happening to you, you carry stress differently. When you experience yourself as an active participant, even in constrained circumstances, your physiology and psychology respond differently. Agency actually changes how the body metabolizes life. There's also a well-known set of findings around learned helplessness associated with Martin Seligman's early work and later refined by others. The simplified takeaway is this. When a being, human or animal, repeatedly experiences that their actions don't change outcomes, they can stop trying. Not because they're lazy, not because they're broken, but because their nervous system learns that effort doesn't matter. This is not a moral issue, it's a learning issue. Agency is learned. Powerlessness is learned. And if something is learned, it can be relearned and it can be unlearned. That matters because many adults who say, I'm not motivated, are not lacking motivation. They're living with a nervous system that has learned that choice is costly, pointless, or unsafe. Now, I want to connect this to your real life because if we keep it academic, we will miss the heart of it. I see this pattern constantly in high-performing people. People who can execute, people who can lead, people who can push through. They often say things like, I don't feel like I have a choice. But when you look closer, it's rarely literally true. They have options. They could say no. They could change direction. They could disappoint someone. They could renegotiate. So why does it still feel like there's no choice? Because agency is not only about external options. It's about internal permission. I'm going to say that again. It's about internal permission. It's about what consequences your nervous system predicts if you choose. And for many people, choice is associated with danger. Danger like conflict or disapproval, rejection or instability, or the terror of not knowing who you are without the role you've been playing. So their nervous system chooses the safest path, compliance, and then they call it responsibility. And this is why agency is not the same thing as freedom on paper. You can have a life full of options and still feel trapped. And you can have a constrained life and still experience agency. Agency is simply the difference between I have to and I am choosing to. Even if the choice is imperfect, even if the choice is temporary, even if the choice is constrained, choice itself restores dignity. Now, there's another piece of science here that matters. From a neuroscience perspective, when you're under threat or when your nervous system perceives threat, your brain shifts resources. The body prioritizes survival. That typically means increased activation of the stress response and reduced access to the parts of the brain involved in flexible thinking, planning, and nuance. In everyday language, this means that when you feel threatened, your world gets smaller. Your options feel fewer. Your imagination contracts. Agency decreases under threat. This is not a character issue, it's biology. So if you're trying to reclaim agency while your body is in chronic stress, it will feel harder than it should because your system is not in a state that supports choice. This is why this month is structured the way it is. Week 1 is teaching. Week 2 will be body-based integration because agency is not just a concept, it's a state. And that state is supported by regulation. Now, let's get very honest about the ways agency gets lost because naming it precisely is part of reclaiming it. Agency is lost when you confuse obligation with identity, when I'm the responsible one becomes I don't get to choose. Agency is lost when you treat other people's discomfort as an emergency, when someone being disappointed feels like danger. Agency is lost when you internalize goodness as compliance, when being a good person means abandoning your own needs. Agency is lost when you equate rest with laziness and stillness with failure, when your body isn't allowed to pause. Agency is lost when you believe the only safe option is to keep going. And if you live that way for a long time, it can be hard to imagine a different relationship to life. So I want to introduce an important distinction. Agency is not the same as impulsive change. A lot of people confuse agency with just blowing things up. They reach a breaking point and they quit, leave, explode, or reinvent overnight. Now, sometimes those changes are necessary, but often that's not agency. That's the nervous system snapping out of compliance. Agency is not a reaction, it's a response. Agency is the steady capacity to pause and say, I'm here, I have options, I can choose what's true. Even if you don't take the biggest option, even if you choose a small step. Agency also doesn't require certainty. And now this is huge. So many people wait to choose until they feel sure. They want clarity before action, but life doesn't always provide that. Agency is not certainty. It is the willingness to choose from your best available truth, even while uncertainty exists. That is mature agency. Now let me offer some composite examples, not as made-up stories with details, but as patterns I see constantly. I see leaders who can make decisions for entire organizations, but can't choose a boundary in their own life. They can say no in a boardroom, but they can't say no to expectations at home. Because the boardroom consequences feel manageable, but relational disappointment feels like danger. Now, that's not a leadership problem, that's a nervous system problem. I see high achievers, often people who were praised for being mature early, who've built their entire sense of worth around being capable. So choice feels like selfishness and rest feels like failure. And then they wonder why they feel trapped in their own success. I see athletes and former athletes who learn that discipline equals value. So even when they've achieved incredible things, they cannot stop driving themselves. They don't know how to choose a gentler pace because gentleness doesn't feel like an option. Their body equates intensity with safety. And I see caretakers, people who have been needed for years, who have so deeply internalized responsibility that they don't even recognize as the places they have a choice. They can't find agency because they don't believe they're allowed to have it. These are not unusual problems. They are normal outcomes of adaptation. So reclaiming agency is not about blaming the past. It's about learning what your system learned and choosing to teach it something new. Now, because this is week 1, I'm going to give you a small amount of reflection. Not heavy journaling yet, but enough to begin mapping your internal landscape. Here are 3 questions I want you to sit with this week. First, where in my life do I feel the least amount of choice? Not where I'm the busiest, where I feel the most trapped. Second, what consequences do I fear if I choose differently? Now, this is where the real material often lives, because the fear usually isn't about the decision, it's about what you believe the choice will cost. And third, where do I confuse responsibility with self-abandonment? Now, that question is the doorway, because again, agency is not about abandoning responsibility, it's abandoning the belief that responsibility requires self-erasure. Now, I want to close this teaching with a reframe that I think will carry you through the entire month. Agency is not something you prove. It is something you practice. And the first practice of agency is not doing something dramatic. It's noticing the places where you have been speaking as if you don't. For example, I have to. That phrase is not always wrong. Sometimes it's accurate. There are real constraints. But often, I have to is default language that removes choice from the nervous system. So the first step of agency is often as simple as this: telling the truth about what you are choosing right now, even if you don't love the truth. Even if the truth is, I am choosing this because I don't want conflict. I'm choosing this because I value stability. I am choosing this because I'm not ready to change yet. That honesty restores agency immediately because it turns unconscious compliance into conscious commitment. And conscious commitment can be renegotiated later. And that's the difference. You are not trapped because you are doing the thing. You feel trapped when you forget you are choosing it. So this week, let it be simple. We are redefining agency. We are removing the myth that agency is boldness, and we are beginning to restore the felt sense of choice. Next week, we'll take this to the body because the body is where agency becomes real. But for now, your job is awareness of choice. Not changing anything, just noticing where you do and don't feel it. That is the beginning of reclaiming agency. Welcome to month 2.